Hi, have you ever wondered what the big deal is about drag shows and our children? Have you wondered why this is such a hot topic today? Well, I'm Julie Behling, and I am the author of the book Beneath Sheep's Clothing, The Communist Takeover of Culture in the USSR and Parallels in Today's America. And I'm also a mother and an American. And in the late 90s, I lived in Russia and for a year and a half as a missionary. And I observed post-communist life firsthand. And when I returned back to the United States, I got a dual master's in Russian and East European studies and Russian language and literature. And for part of my graduate degree, I wrote a master's thesis on underground Christian movements in the Soviet Union, their survival tactics and the tactics of the Soviet state to destroy them. And for 20 years, I have been studying communism. And communism is the implementation of socialism through force. And I've also been studying Marxism, which is the playbook for preparing a society to accept communism, to fall to communism more accurately. You might be wondering what this has to do with kids and drag shows, but just hold on just for a minute and I'll explain. In the 20th century, Marxist thought underwent some substantial mutations as the Marxist intellectuals of that time were trying to figure out how they could get Western nations to fall to communism. And what they realized is that the cultural bedrock of Western nations was not very conducive to communism, and that what they would need to do first would be to infiltrate certain key institutions with communist-friendly ideologies to prepare the nations to fall, the Western nations to fall to communism. These institutions include education, churches, the family, media and entertainment, and also the legal system. So again, these cultural Marxists, they knew that wherever a culture of a society goes, the political system would follow. So Marxism originated with the German philosopher Karl Marx in the 19th century with the Communist Manifesto. And the basic playbook of Marxism goes as follows. You locate a group of people that can be considered oppressed, and you constantly stoke their anger and their grievance towards another group which can be considered their oppressors. And with classical Marxism, it was the proletariat or the working class people versus the bourgeois or the upper class people. And so you have to stoke this hatred and even bringing people to the point of willing to be violent against their oppressor class. And once that oppressor class, which is a more powerful class, can be torn down, then there's a vacuum of power, and then communists can come in, swoop up the power, and you have a new communist state. And for those of you who have not studied communism in depth, let me break it down for you. The fruits of communism are enslavement, impoverishment, and mass death. It's the deadliest form of government that our world has ever seen, with an estimated 180 to 100 million premature deaths in the 20th century alone and counting. The death toll just keeps racking up. So Marxism takes something that's true. There are a multitude of oppressed groups of people throughout the world's history. People have been oppressed. But what Marxism does is it capitalizes and exploits the pain of the oppressed in order to enact a violent revolution of society and snatch up more power. Marxism uses the pain of the exploited, exploiting them even more, turning them into cannon fodder for their violent revolution that they want to have happen. And all the while promising them a utopic society where everyone's going to be equal, no one's going to be left out. In reality, communism has never worked the way they said it would. It's only brought more misery and death. So you may have heard of critical race theory, or CRT. Critical race theory stems from an offshoot of Marxism called neo-Marxism. With neo-Marxism or new Marxism, the central premise is that you have to come to view all aspects of society and all aspects of history and all aspects of human interchange with oppression and power dynamics. Oppressed versus oppressor, once again. Beginning in the 1970s, neo-Marxist thought leaders began infusing their ideologies into the universities here in America and the West, starting with the social sciences. Critical race theory was developed in the 70s and 80s, and it places people of color as the oppressed class and white people, white supremacy, or a nebulous idea called whiteness, as the oppressor class. The goal with CRT is to make all people see all aspects of society and social discourse and history through the single lens of racism and racial oppression. And then stoking that pain, that very painful point, to try to get people of color to rise up in revolution and tear down the systems that white people have put into place. Because just by definition, if white people created that system, then it's part of systemic racism. So because it's obviously true that Black people have been oppressed, it's really easy to get well-meaning people duped into this agenda, not understanding what it actually is. It doesn't actually help people of color. It's just using their pain to enact a violent revolution, a violent overthrow of the power structures so the new power can come in. So not only are people of color targeted with this agenda, but white people who empathize with the plight of Black people in America are also highly targeted, and they're brought in as allies. And in order to be an ally, you can't just be against racism, which the vast, vast majority of people in our country are. You have to be explicitly anti-racist, which means you have to be actively picking at and trying to tear down any vestige of supposed systemic racism, which I do think there is some, but everything becomes racist. Everything becomes systemic racism. Everything that is a current power, part of the power structure or institutional fabric of the nation, if it was created by white people, it's subject to being torn out and removed. Also, part of critical race theory is that it's okay, it's free game to be discriminatory against white people. So in order to heal racism, critical race theory offers the solution of more racism. So how does that work exactly? It's not working. It just creates more problems. So now we're ready to get to the heart of this whole drag shows and kids issue. And so what this is, it stems from a branch of neo-Marxism called gender and queer theory. It's very similar to critical race theory, except the oppressed class is now people on the LGBTQ spectrum. And just by definition, the oppressor class is heterosexual, normal gendered people. Just by their existence are the oppressor class. And a society that embraces heterosexuality as normal and that embraces the normal binary genders as normal, that's the new oppressor class here. So gender theory activists work to tear down the power structure of the binary genders, which is simply a biological fact. And they focus their efforts on the most highly persuadable segment of society, which is our children. So I'm going to go through some academic papers now, and I give a little shout out to James Lindsay for bringing these papers to my attention through his podcast. But in their academic papers, gender and queer theorists state that society's heteronormativity creates trauma for children who may eventually become queer. Heteronormativity is a big word that simply means the normalcy of heterosexuality, where males are attracted to females and vice versa. The continuity of the human race literally depends on heteronormativity, but that's not a problem for these theorists. In order to liberate society from the traumatic heteronormativity, gender and queer theorists, especially gender theorists, feel that they must get to the children as young as possible in all public spaces, as many public spaces as possible, including public schools, entertainment, and any other possible way to expose children as young as possible to content that challenges the binary genders. There's the drag queens right there for you. And it's really crucial to know that this is being done without parental consent, to have this agenda being shoved through our schools, which it already has been for years, many years. So in queer theorist Hannah Dyer's writings, she promotes exposing young children to sexual content as long as it's queer. She claims that the rhetoric of protecting quote unquote childhood innocence it harms children, and that children should not be viewed as asexual or not sexual. Children absolutely should be viewed as sexual beings, and young children need to be exposed to queer sexuality in the public schools and public sphere as young as possible, preschool age, so that their queer imaginations can run with it and begin experimenting with queer sexuality without parental consent. So what about drag queens? In 1984, pretty much the grandmother of queer and gender theories, Gail Rubin, wrote a paper called Thinking Sex, and she proposes a radical sexual revolution for society in which all, what she calls them, erotic minorities would be destigmatized. And this includes prostitutes, people who engage in incest and pedophilia, and also transvestites or drag queens. She laments against the moral panics, as she calls it, of Western railing against pornography. She frames, in her paper, she frames the fight for what she calls erotic justice in very explicitly Marxist terms. Again, social justice, erotic justice, racial justice, it's all woke neo-Marxist. And she claims that sexuality is absolutely political. And just as a side note, Gail Rubin in this paper from 1984, she's the originator of the idea that sex and gender are not the same. And that is now very commonly believed all throughout the younger segment of society, thanks to this being taught in our public schools without parental consent. So more on drag queens and kids. Now we get to a 2021 paper called Drag Pedagogy, the Playful Practice of Queer Imagination in Early Childhood by Harper Keenan and Lil Miss Hot Mess, who is a drag queen herself. And in this paper, the authors frame the traditional education that perpetuates the construct of the binary genders as oppressive. Again, explicitly Marxist here. And claim, this is a quote, they claim that, quote, the harmful impacts of gender normativity reverberate across the living world, end quote. So in other words, to them, the rampant tendency of males to be males and females to be females, it's a problem. It's a big problem for them. And they have just the solution. There's drag queen story time in the public schools, in the public libraries, and drag shows, some of them in schools even, and in the public sphere, that are inviting the children to come and partake and view this content. And they don't just want like liberal parents to bring their kids, they actually want your children. They want my child. They want all of the children to be exposed to the queer sexuality as young as possible. In this paper, the authors bluntly acknowledge that the goal is not to create more empathy towards the LGBTQ crowd. The goal is explicitly to get young children to experiment with queer sexuality and kind of try it on and see how it fits and see which of the many genders they would like, which of the many different types of sexuality feels good to them. Little kids, your kids. And they want to, quote, support students in finding the unique or queer aspects of themselves, unquote, and, quote, actively destabilize the normative function of schooling through transformative education, unquote. That word transformative that you see, it's a Marxist buzzword, just FYI. So the goal is to infiltrate education and to queer and trans our kids, all of our kids if possible. One thing that happens at some drag queen story hours is that the drag queen will read a book maybe that explores queer sexuality, and then we'll do a craft with the little kiddies. Maybe they'll make a tiara or a little wand, or maybe they'll invite the little kids to pick their own drag queen name, and maybe they'll sing a song like to the tune of The Wheels on the Bus. They'll sing the hips of the drag queen go swish, 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 and then do a little dance with the kids, and to get the kids, again, drag pedagogy, it's teaching, it's play, and it's getting to the little kids. What's really crazy is, we're seeing a lot of these drag shows popping up and they're calling themselves family friendly. In this paper, the authors explicitly state that that doesn't mean it's appropriate for families. It's actually a little bit of a play on words, because the word family for the trans crowd, actually, they call the other trans people and queer people their family. And also because it's family friendly in that it's friendly to the concept of promoting alternative family structures. They explicitly state that in this paper. So I live in a very conservative part of the country, one of the most conservative parts of the country in Washington County, Utah, that votes like 75% Republican. And we started having the family-friendly drag shows right here where I live. We had a Christmas vendor event at the park right close to where I live. And it was a big vendor event. Come and do some Christmas shopping, and your kids can take pictures with Mrs. Claus. And then in this teeny tiny fine print, the characters that were going to be there, the elves, that was going to be sponsored by Southern Utah Drag Stars. So the elves were in drag. And this was not something, it was not obvious to most people. They're showing up with their kids to a Christmas event, and then the elves are drag queens. So that's a little bit, yeah. And then we had another Christmas drag family-friendly event in my town. It was how the Grinch stole drag, and it was Grinch characters in drag. And now we have one tomorrow, and tomorrow from when I'm filming this for St. Patrick's Day. It's a Shrek characters in drag. And again, the characters using beloved children's characters, obviously is very explicitly working to tie this agenda to beloved childhood characters. And I guarantee you, go online and look and see where you live. You will find that there are family-friendly drag events going on all over the country, most likely in your town or a city very near you. There was a Christmas tour of RuPaul's Christmas drag show in the Christmas of 2022, where they did 36 shows across 18 states. And I'm just gonna show a clip of that here. By the way, this clip is not for children. Please don't let your kids watch this.
This was a family-friendly drag show in Austin, Texas. This was a tour from multiple drag queens from RuPaul's Drag Race. So let's just watch this.
You are such an awesome mom for bringing their kid out to a family-friendly drag show, ladies and gentlemen. Are you confused yet? Minty fresh. I had sex with my father's boss in my father's office. What's your favorite part?
Nothing.
Well, I slept with my stepfather's co-worker in our RV over Thanksgiving.
We have school events with drag queens, drag brunch, drag bingo. Go online and see what there is in your area. So now, if all this was a few drag events where parents are choosing to take their kids to these drag events, and that's the kind of education they want their kids to have, that would be one thing, but that is not the only thing. Today, there is a broad effort to infuse all aspects broadly across American culture with the queer and gender theory agendas, beginning with kids at the youngest of ages, so that they'll reject the binary genders, or make it more likely that they'll reject the binary genders, and then perhaps explore some alternative gender for themselves. So we have books in public schools with pornographic and explicit content, some of it promoting exploration of queer sex and gender transitioning for kids without your parental permission. There's lessons in public school on the genderbread person, which teaches about all the many different made-up genders that kids can embrace. We have activist teachers in probably almost all the schools at this point, whose goal is to incessantly insert these Marxist agendas in their school curricula. We have SEL, social and emotional learning curricula, in the schools, which is one of the main delivery mechanisms for this agenda. We have, at least within the school's walls, there's gender bending, queering TikTok videos that our youth consume, TV shows and movies for kids, preschool kids that embrace the agenda, comprehensive sexuality education in schools that promotes the agenda. We have gender affirming care where teens and children are subject to harmful drugs and irreversible surgeries that could render them sterile for life. There are many cases of kids being encouraged to socially transition at school to another gender without parental knowledge or permission. Shockingly, some churches are also embracing this agenda. Queer and gender theory weaponize the pain of LGBTQ individuals, making them human shields to push the agenda of confusing kids, in some cases hypersexualizing them, grooming them to think they might be queer or trans, and love bombing them if they take steps in that direction. Meanwhile, depicting straight and cisgendered kids as not only boring, but the sinister part of the sinister oppressor class, unless they become allies to the agenda and promote the agenda as well, tearing down the binary genders and speaking out against heteronormativity. So I recognize that there are some people, including some friends of mine, that support this agenda, and this is how they want their children to be instructed. And if that's the case, then so be it. But the truth is that 70%, there was a recent poll, and 70% of parents in America are against this agenda being taught in the schools to their children. That doesn't mean they're against gay people or trans people. They're against their children in a public sphere being taught this agenda, teaching their children about gender and sexuality. The queer and gender theories, it's an ideology. And we've decided in America, decades or more ago, our forebears decided that America would be a pluralistic society, that in our public schools and public sphere, we would not promote any specific ideology or religion, but that we would allow people to coexist with different ideologies and different religions. So it used to be America's education system was very Christian. It was Calvinist, and that was all removed from the education, from public education. But now they're putting this other ideology in of the Marxist queer and gender theories. And so I would ask the people that support the Marxist queer and gender theories, how would you feel if by sending your kid to school, they were getting Bible study at school that was perhaps anti-gay, anti-trans? How would you like your kids to be raised like that? No, you wouldn't. And so it's the same for Christian or many other parents of not who aren't even Christian necessarily, that don't want the schools to be teaching this ideology to their children, that they have the right to teach their children about gender and sexuality in the home. So I'm joining the chorus of people of all stripe who are against the Marxist gender and queer theory being in our schools, and I'm pushing back against it, trying to infiltrate our culture at large. And just take note here that I haven't even shared my own personal views about homosexuality and LGBTQ. I actually have a pretty moderate opinion. My opinion is too liberal for many conservatives and too conservative for many liberals. I respect all people and want all people to be respected. What I'm discussing here is the appropriateness of the schools in taking the liberty of inserting this agenda without parental consent. So in this video, I've explained what queer and gender theories are, and it's a recent rebranding of Marxism. And I've established that Marxism is a playbook for enacting a violent revolution of society so that a new communist order can come into place. I've also asserted and explained the fact that communism is the deadliest form of government our world has ever seen. Maybe you can see why I'm very much against any of this agenda taking over our culture here in America. We're really here in the very late stages of a full-on cultural revolution, Marxist cultural revolution in America. And we've got to take broad action now. We can't just sit back and let this revolution continue. If you have school-age kids or college kids, chances are they've already been indoctrinated into these agendas. And if they don't identify as queer personally, chances are they still support the agenda unless you have explicitly taught them otherwise. Again, most people are well-meaning who support these agendas. They want LGBTQ individuals to be treated with respect. But again, that's not the point of the agenda, to create more empathy. The point is to queer and trans the kids. So if we just pushed stop on this agenda right now, what would the toll be? The toll is, unfortunately, probably pretty catastrophic. So in a 2021 poll, they found that 20% of Generation Z identifies as LGBTQ. That's the young generation now, not the little kids, but like middle school, high school age and college. Some college age kids are Generation Z. 20% identify as LGBTQ. Millennials, it was about 10% that identified amongst my generation. Generation X, it's 4%. And then it was baby boomers, something like 2%. So it's been growing exponentially. Even more concerning, that was 2021, but we're already in 2023. And I watched a recent interview with someone who's on the Utah State School Board, Natalie Klein, where she stated that it's actually now closer in Utah, in a very conservative red Utah, or it used to be conservative and red. I'm not sure it still is. We're now at about 40%. I'm not kidding. And I have a friend with kids in high school here in conservative parts of Utah that concur. It's more around 40% in Utah, where I live, conservative supposedly, of high school kids that identify as LGBTQ. So we're on a massive exponential growth here of this agenda. What's going to be the toll on marriage and birth rates in just even 5-10 years? Unless some major damage control is done and we put a stop to this agenda now, it's unfortunately, I don't even want to know. I don't want to think about it, how bad it's going to be. It's not just about queering and transing the kids. It's again about subverting the family, about alienating kids from their families of origin and alienating kids from their religion and their mainstream culture. That what this does, and that this is also stated in the papers and something that the academic James Lindsay has explicitly shared, the alienation created by transing and queering our children makes them much, much more susceptible to political radicalization and joining, perhaps violently, the Marxist, neo-Marxist cultural revolution ongoing. And we see instances of violence against conservatives. And just look at China, at what their cultural revolution did to their society. And we had children turning their parents in for being part of the oppressor class. People died. Lots of people died. So what can we do to counter this agenda? Some states are banning gender affirming care, which is for children. I mean, adults, I guess, can do what they want, but this is our children we're talking here. You're cutting off breasts, cutting off genitalia, reconstructing genitalia, giving hormone blockers to kids that haven't even gone through puberty, when the truth is that the vast majority of children with gender dysphoria, when they go through puberty, it goes away. A lot of these kids with gender dysphoria have experienced extreme trauma in their lives, perhaps molested. A little girl who's molested by a man, and they're like, wow, if I could just be a boy, then I'd be safe from being molested. And then the law here in Utah, I know in other places, if a child comes to you expressing any sort of wondering about that they might be the wrong gender, you cannot question it. You just only have to affirm it. So no one is perhaps talking to these kids, and maybe some of them, it's really trauma, perhaps sexual trauma that they're dealing with. So this is very dangerous, and I don't have anything against these children who are falling into this trap that's being set for them. I have nothing against them. It's the agenda that I'm against and the destruction of society that I am speaking out against. Well, yes, let's encourage our states to ban gender affirming care. Some states are banning drag shows for kids. I applaud that. Some states are banning the queer and gender theory for children. I applaud that. We're not going to get any support for this, pushing back against this from the federal level. We have a President Joe Biden who said that it's like, quote, next to sinful to ban gender affirming care, which is, again, the medical mutilation of children that is going to perhaps sterilize them and permanently alter them when they're children. They don't necessarily know. They are not in a place to make decisions like that for themselves. We need to boycott the indoctrinating entertainment, and we need to contact our local and state leaders to push for banning and reducing this agenda. If you have kids in school, you need to really seriously consider homeschooling them. I know it's hard. I'm homeschooling my son. It's not easy. I homeschool and work from home, and balancing that's a challenge, but I've got to do what I've got to do. We can and we must teach our children to be respectful of all people, especially and including people that are different from them, people who are LGBTQ. Everyone is worthy of respect. There's a place at the table in our society for all people. I firmly, firmly believe that. We can create a society that's respectful of all, that brings all people to the table, and a society that protects children from this sexual grooming agenda. So we need to teach our children and our youth about this queer and gender theory agenda. I actually have put together a home lesson for parents. It's a 2-part lesson called The Ideology of Wokeness. This is part of the woke Marxist agenda, the gender theory and queer theory agenda. So I have this lesson that you can get to teach your kids about what this agenda is. It includes links to videos for further education on the matter. Now, there's 2 other lessons I've also created, home lessons for parents to use with their teens. One is called Why Does Freedom Matter? And the other is The Anatomy of Tyranny, that goes through the red flags of a tyrannical government. I am working at this time to turn the content of my book, Beneath Sheep's Clothing, into a documentary to further get this information. This is just 1% of the information that I have in my book and that will be in the documentary. There's so much more. This is just the teeny tiny piece of it. So if you agree that this is valuable content, please click on the link to my Give, Send, Go. I'm working to raise funds. My filmmaker I've been working with has been working for free, and I need to pay him. We need to get the trailer for the documentary completed for Beneath Sheep's Clothing, the documentary. And if you donate $15 or more, I will actually throw in all 3 of those home lessons as a gift that I just mentioned. If you donate $50 or more, you will also get access to view the documentary Beneath Sheep's Clothing when it comes out. to view it online. And donations of $100 or more, you'll get all of that. Plus you will get early access to the documentary online. And I will send you a signed hard copy paperback of, and this is a pretty substantial book here, of Beneath Sheep's Clothing. It took me 20 years to research and write this book. And whether you can donate or not, please share this link and share so that anyone that you know with children, with kids in school, or who want to understand what this agenda is about, or who maybe they think it's great to have drag queens with the kids. Maybe you can send that to those people as well. You're also welcome to go to Amazon if you want to understand more about the Communist Takeover of Culture. Go to Amazon, grab a copy of my book, Beneath Sheep's Clothing, or you can go to my website, beneathsheepsclothing.com, and find the link there. There are organizations across America that are working against this agenda. We've got Moms for Liberty, we've got Gays Against Groomers, and here in Utah, Utah Parents United. Let's just not sit back and let our culture be taken over by anything to do with Marxism. Let's go back to sanity, and I thank you so much for your time, and until next time, bye.